There we go.
Welcome, and three more welcomes. Welcome to everybody. Part of our continuing series where we talk to reporters, professors, columnists, writers, activists, anybody on the left, anybody on the right, anybody who can think clearly with complete thoughts. And we're going to provide their opinions unedited, unaltered directly to you, the public, so that you could do this thing that was popular when I was in high school called thinking for yourself. Maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't, who knows. With us today, it is our distinguished honor to have with us Professor Todd L. Belt. He's the Director of Political Management Master's Program at the famous George Washington University. Todd L. Belt is a professor and director of the Political Management Program in the Graduate School of Political Management at the George Washington University. His research and writing focus on the presidency, mass media, public opinion, campaigns, and elections. Dr. Belt is a co-author of 4 books: The Post-Heroic Presidency, Leverage Leadership in an Age of Limits, The Presidency and Domestic Policy, Comparing Leadership Styles, FDR to Obama, We Interrupt This Newscast, How to Improve Local News and Win Ratings 2. He's also published a dozen chapters in edited scholarly books and over 24 articles appearing in academic journals such as the Political Communication, the International Journal of Press Politics, the Journal of Health and Social Behavior, the California Journal of Politics and Policy, Political Linguistics, the Journal of Social Policy, Social Research and Policy, the President's and Executive Politics Report, the Columbia Journalism Review. Wow, that's impressive. And Campaigns and Elections. I received his BA at the University of California, Irvine. Excellent. MA and PhD Political Science at the University of Southern California. That's where I went to school. Great school. Right. Studied at the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research at the University of Michigan as part of his graduate work. He's worked as a research consultant for political campaigns, interest groups, think tanks, and media corporations. He's held the John W. Kluge Fellowship in Digital Studies at the Library of Congress, as well as visiting positions at Wellesley College, Kyungpook University in Daegu, South Korea. He's also taught at California State University, Northridge, California State University, Long Beach, the UCLA, the University of Southern California, and Whittier College, or as they say, Whittier. And that's an inside joke. Chapter 1, Social Media Activism and Party Polarization. Did Democratic social media activists influence the outcome of the 2020 presidential election? In this book, but we'll get to that in a second. Before we do, let's check in. Professor, did I say anything wrong? Do we need to correct something? Was there anything incorrect we need to correct?
Well, that was great. The only thing I would correct is it's pronounced as John W. Kluge Fellowship. Okay. It's not intuitive, so I wouldn't expect you to know it.
Kluge.
Yeah, John Kluge was the. There you go. He was the owner of Metro Media, which is eventually sold to Fox News. And he endowed a research group at the Library of Congress, the Kluge Center.
That's perfect. And you are very well informed and affiliated and researched in this topic. Let's get right to the meat and potatoes. Social media activism and party polarization. In this book, Polarization and Political Party Factions in the 2020 Election, the volume explores the conflict between two forces, party polarization and party factionalism. A major change in America's two political parties over the past half century has been increased polarization, which has led to a new era of heightened inter-party competition, resulting in stronger and more cohesive parties. You also did this, we'll get to that in a minute, explaining differences, taste, and humor, liberals and conservatives, and how celebrities became political during the times of threat. So you've been looking at polarization and how regular people seem to get caught up into it and the difference between the two parties. Tell us about this chapter in this book. And before you answer, if you could answer both as an academic and as just an American with 2 working eyeballs, and if you could pretend that I've been in a cave for 5 years, cave for 7 years. What's going on? Why is this an important topic worth writing? What's going on in America? Why did you think this was a good chapter to write? Why did people approach you about this? Why was this a relevant topic at the time?
Well, I think I'd have to shove you back in the cage more to like 10 or 15 years to really talk about why this has become such an important issue, Marcus. And one of the reasons I wrote this is a continuation of some of the research that I started with my colleague Michael Cornfield at the George Washington University, and we were particularly interested in people online, people who were on Twitter and Facebook, and how they may be different than other voters. There was a big article that was written prior to the 2020 election that said blatantly in the New York Times, the Twitter electorate is not the Democratic electorate, and trying to understand um, why they're different, how they're different, and how that affects electoral outcomes. Of course, social media is responsible for getting more voices heard out in the Twitter sphere and in Facebook and elsewhere. And the question is, to what extent? Who are the people out there doing this? And ultimately, what ramifications does it have on our politics?
What did you find?
Well, predominantly we find that similar to some of the other uh, research that has sort of scratched the surface, that has found something similar to 80% of all tweets are created by less than 20% of people online. It's a very small fragment. So it's obviously not very representative. And it's less representative in a couple of other ways as well. We've studied both Democrats and Republicans, and we find them to be more on the polar extremes. They tend to be a bit more white, and they have a bit of a higher income and a bit of a higher education. But for the most part, and for the purposes of our discussion here, they are more on the polar fringes. And this particular study that I wrote looks at the Democrats particularly, but we do have some data on both Republicans and Democrats.
I've heard some people say, and look, academics in this, that literally some academics in the field of political polarization have said, yeah, the left went a little bit more left, but really it's all the Republicans' fault and all the blame's placed upon them. And really they're the ones that need to do all the fixing. And really the left didn't really need to do anything. And we could basically just ignore talking about the left and focus exclusively on the right. I'm not exaggerating. There's literally some top researchers in political polarization who are outright saying that. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense to you based upon your research?
No, it doesn't. It is true. I think there's two things to look at in terms of polarization. And the first is to look at elite polarization. Members of Congress, people at the heads of the party, people who are doing the work of governance. They're a little different than, of course, mass polarization, which is everyone else, all the rest of us, right? And the two are, of course, linked because elites depend upon the public for getting elected. And of course, the public oftentimes learns what they know about politics through elite cues, or what we sometimes call in political communication as the two-step flow from party elites. It's not as unidirectional as it used to be, as some researchers would say, but a lot of people do take cues from elites. We do know that in elite polarization, that Republicans moved further to the right, and are still further to the right than they were at say 20 years ago. But the Democrats have also moved further to the left. It's absolutely true. It's not perfectly symmetrical. Republicans have moved further than Democrats have, and this is also true at the mass level. Although we're seeing it's a little bit when you get Donald Trump thrown into the mix, right? You start to get some issues with measurement that are a little difficult, because Donald Trump wasn't your typical conservative, right? He took a number of policy stands that were oftentimes associated with the Democratic Party, such as the economic nationalism, protectionism, and such. So that starts to make it a little bit more difficult to measure the mass tendencies. A little bit easier to measure what's going on in Congress with what's called the DW nominate scores and those sort of things that we can use. But I think that's how I would summarize what's going on.
So some people have said it to me this way, that you have affective polarization, which is people are now mad at each other and basically, I don't like you because you're the other. I know I'm contributing a little bit. And then you have political polarization, which means, do we actually disagree on exact policy issues? And I've seen many professors, not all, say that there's not really political polarization, but there is affective polarization. People, there's these national surveys that show majority of Americans agree women's right to choose, and they don't want their kids shot, and climate change is bad. Okay, but then obviously we have January 6th, and how do you juxtapose those two things? And what I've heard from some people is, in a box, people left to their own devices may not disagree on certain issues, but we live in a time now where people have been so amped up that the other team, the other party's the bad guy. They're not just an opposition party. And so that's roughly how it works. What do you feel about that? Is that accurate?
Not completely. And I think that the affective polarization is certainly there. There's a lot of good evidence out there. But in terms of straight policy issues, there is that going on as well. And I can see that in the data that I have in this particular paper. We can see that the people who are online, who are more ideological and have more liberal policy issues than those who are not online. And so if you think about it in terms of the polarized active group of Democrats, and again, I'm only studying Democrats in this particular study, we see that they are more liberal and do take more liberal positions on a number of issues. Back in 2020, some of the issues including issues such as policing reform, supporting Black Lives Matter, even being okay with the violence that stemmed from the death of George Floyd. There were actual significant differences with that group that was online versus the group that was not as active online. And I should say the online group we identified as people who said this is what's called a panel study, where the same group of people are repeatedly studied over several times, and this was 4 times. They said that they had posted about politics online in all 4 of those measures that we had. So they were particularly on there. So it's not just Twitter. These are people who are on all social media. We didn't actually limit it just to Twitter. But of course, Twitter was big during 2020. Of course, one of the major candidates made his name on Twitter throughout a number of his campaign in 2016 and throughout his presidency. But so the voices that we're hearing out there on social media are more polarized than the voices of the regular common voters, rank and file voters in the party.
So we do have the extremists from both the left and the right. I know you study primarily the left, but there is evidence extremists on both the left and the right on Twitter. And both the left and the right who are participating on Twitter are more extreme than their counterparts who are not participating in social media.
That is correct. I've studied both the left and the right in a previous paper. In this paper, this is just the Democrats. Yeah.
Right. And while the Republicans moved first and they moved further to the right, it's fair to say that the Democrats have also moved to the left.
That's true. And anecdotally, you hear lots of Democrats saying that, you can't be a pro-life Democrat anymore. And then, you see, there's very few of the Northeastern Republicans like there used to be, and the solid South is solid Republican now. And so we've seen these things anecdotally all over the place. And if you look, over time, some of these issues have become more solidified and crystallized in public opinion polls.
What percentage of the voting base are we talking about is participating on Twitter?
Okay, I can give you the numbers for all social media, which is I have, because this was not.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, when I say Twitter, I mean all social media. I'm sorry. That's what I mean. Sorry.
And I'm saying not just people who go there for news, but are actually involved in it. I believe the number is 24%.
That's not tiny. I know that's a minority,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not tiny. That seems 1 in 4. And when I look at things like um, the Irish Republican Army in the period of the Troubles, where the Irish were fighting against the English for freedom in Northern Ireland, it was something like only 2%.
Mm-hmm.
The population was actually participating in the IRA, and that caused that whole 2% actually participating with like 15 to 30% sympathetic,
Mm-hmm.
giving them a place to hide. ISIS in Iraq had similar numbers, very small percentage participating, but a wide amount of support. And the support numbers look like around 24, 30%. So I'm pointing out to people, when we look at history, that's enough to cause some real damage a couple times in history.
Well, I think there's something to be said for somebody who goes and expresses themselves online versus somebody who is willing to support a terrorist organization. I
Of
think
course.
those are two very,
True.
very different things.
True. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. I'm just talking about how there seems to be, you could have a small amount of extremists of a total population, and yet they seemed to drive the conversation for the whole population
Right.
occasionally.
And that was the reason we picked up this study is, why are people, why do people respond so much to what people are saying on Twitter? Is it what's really going to matter in the election? And that's why I picked this topic.
Um, okay, two questions before we get more into it. Elite polarization. People take cues from the elites, but I think you also said not as unidirectional today as some would say. I've heard the theory that the public takes cues from the elites, like Donald Trump says, go ahead and punch someone in the face, and then they think more violence is acceptable. But I've also heard the theory that politicians take their cues from the public, namely that
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump didn't just pop out in 2016 and start saying racist stuff. He was toying around with the Tea Party during President Obama, and he was trying different phrases with them to see which ones they picked up on. And after years of toying with them, he kind of gradually developed this sort of racist, xenophobic methodology. But he got that from the Tea Party. Like, this is what people were saying. This is what they wanted. He saw that. He reached out to it. And then when he started campaigning on it, boy, did it work well.
Mm-hmm.
So that theory is politicians take cues from the elites. I've heard that it works in a circle now, kind of a vicious circle. What do you think of that theory?
I think that's right, but let's not just, far be it from me to not blame Donald Trump for a lot of what's going on
Right.
in the country, but he also brought his own personal beliefs and sensibility to it, as someone who's done business and someone who has particular relationships with and perspectives on international trade, and was able to voice it in that way.
Sure. I'm in California, and the attitude was we lived in a perfect state of nature and everything was perfect before Trump, and then he alone made all of America racist. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. And I said, okay, well, if that's true, then why didn't Trump did not create the birther controversy. He just popularized it. That came from somebody else. He saw what other people were doing and picked up on it. And I also point to, okay, so what about the Miss America in 2010 and 2012? You had a girl whose parents were from Lebanon. 2 years later, you had a girl whose parents were from India. These are both American girls. They both grew up here. They talk, they walk, they act like American girls. They win the Miss America pageant when Obama's here, post-racial society. ABC, NBC, CBS News has to stop what they're doing and go, wow, national news story. So many people across America are backlashing at these two women. And it's horrific, the amount of responses we're getting. Responses like, what the hell is that brown-skinned person doing representing us? We don't need no damn Muslim. And that wasn't there. That was 2010, 2012. Trump had nothing to do with those events at all. So it seems like maybe he was picking up something that the public was there, at least the Tea Party. And then he repeats it back to people. They love what they're hearing. Oh, people like this. Pour on more gasoline.
Yeah.
possible?
Well, there's, Democrats and Republicans will identify where all this began at different places. Many Democrats will hearken back to Newt Gingrich and his rise to the speakership, and sort of his take no prisoners approach to climbing that power ladder in the House of Representatives to becoming speaker, and bringing us more of a politics of personal destruction
Yeah.
on the Hill that certainly wasn't there before. And Republicans will talk about other aspects of Democrats. I can't remember the exact day that they would place it, but there were attacks on people like Reagan and George H.W. Bush, that they felt that were unfair. Oh, Dan Quayle's the one particularly. Some of the personal attacks on Dan Quayle when he was running for vice president, particularly insulting his intelligence and the like. Republicans feel that was a bridge too far, and this politics of personal destruction and going after people. This is what really contributes to polarization, right? Because once you take a public stance saying that somebody has a negative attribute, it makes it much more difficult to compromise with them in the future. And it makes it difficult to explain to those who voted for you and are activated to support you by those really hard lines that you're taking against others, to continue to get their support. If you say at one point in time, this person is the enemy, but then you go in and compromise to get something done, because that's how politics works.
Right.
You have to create compromises in order to get things done. And I think that this is really magnified, of course, by social media. They used to say back in the old days of network television, the most dangerous place in the world is in between a member of Congress and a camera. And that's because they were all really trying to get their voice out there in order to get reelected, to speak with their constituents and the like. Now, of course, we have social media and they can get everything out there. And even though you can delete your posts, these things are findable for people who are out there looking for them. And politicians end up getting themselves sort of painted into a corner in a lot of ways. And it becomes really difficult to get into that back room and say, hey, you realize this wasn't personal. This was just politics. Let's get something done for our constituents. You get a lot of hurt feelings. And then, like I said, you get a lot of voters who feel like they weren't voting for the real authentic person as well.
That's great comment about 15 years further. But then that's the question is, a lot of people have said political polarization is only because of social media. If we just got rid of social media, everything's perfect. But you yourself are saying, yeah, go back 15 years before. I know there wasn't social media 15 years before, or at least it was not the level of impact it has. So it sounds like you're saying there was some political polarization before social media. Is that fair, Professor?
Well, I would say that the ground was fertile for it to come forward. And I think that some of the fertility of that ground is what we call media fragmentation. And if we talk about Newt Gingrich, I mean, that's 30 years ago now, right? That's twice as long. And what was Newt Gingrich doing? He was getting on C-SPAN, right? Because he had the cameras, going at him, and he could, use those long diatribes against Democrats. And he knew that it would get out there, and there would be some video that other places would pick up and recirculate, right? And then we have, throughout the 90s, we have the proliferation of the cable channels, and now we have channels that are on what we call OTT, over the top, subscription channels. And of course, we have web only channels, and it's really easy to get out there. And there is a place for your voice, depending upon what you want to say. And so the fragmentation of the media has really contributed to that. And of course, it's virtually a free for all on social media. Anybody can get their voice out there.
I've thought about this. That the ground was already fertile. That's kind of that's basically a philosophy I'm going to. I'm withholding my opinion, but I don't think I could be wrong, that if you tried running Trump in 1990, that it would have worked. I don't think the climate was there yet. I also think if you dropped social media in the year 2000, before 9/11 that it would have taken off. It seems like we got worse, we got worse, we got worse, we got worse, we got worse. And then as we're pretty bad, somebody goes, wow, all this tinder's really dry. Now let's just pour some gasoline on it.
Yeah.
But the tinder was already dry. There was already tinder there. It wasn't just, it was perfect. And then Trump came and he ruined it all by himself with Twitter and Facebook. I just felt that to be too fantastical to be.
No, Donald Trump did not create polarization, but he was a master at weaponizing it.
And you pointed to some other historical figures like Gingrich. So let's get to the meat and potatoes. Professor, I'm told we just get rid of social media. I've done this with many academics. And I go like this. I go, this is a magic wand. It's not really a magic wand. It's just a cheap pen. But I go, here's a magic wand. I'm going to give you the virtual magic wand. And if you wave this and you go, poof, anything you want happens. I have a couple academics who go, poof, social media's gone. And now we have to talk to each other better. Is it that simple? We just get rid of social media companies and everything snaps right back to place?
It's not quite that simple. Of course, the social media, the genie's out of the bottle now, right? You can't get rid of social media even if you wanted to. People enjoy being able to interact with one another about politics. Politicians enjoy the ability to speak directly with constituents. We see this back in 1996. Both of the major presidential candidates, Bob Dole and Bill Clinton, really released some pretty tremendously engaging websites, right? They were using the power of the internet to try to really connect with voters. As long as there's going to be a way to connect directly with voters, to avoid what politicians call the media filter, to be able to speak directly with them, they're going to find a way. And we have a lot of technological ways of doing that right now. Simply getting rid of social media is not going to get rid of that desire. And of course, the desire of people to speak directly with politicians. Politicians are closer to them now and more responsive to what they have to say. You don't have to go out to Iowa or New Hampshire during the primaries to speak to a candidate.
So Trump is not the first politician to say, I want to get past the media filter, the media guards, and I want to speak directly to the public. That's not just his idea and he focused on it. This is something I think you're saying that goes back to 96 when candidates realized there's a way I could communicate directly with the public and I don't have to ask the media what their opinion is.
Exactly. Or they don't have to depend upon the media broadcasting it. And, we can even see from the amount of time that candidates were allowed to speak in their own voice on the major newscasts, ABC, NBC, and CBS back in the 1970s, that amount of time went from about 60 seconds during the 1960s and 70s to about 8 seconds during the 1990s. In other words, what press coverage was doing voiceovers of what you saw the candidates doing, oftentimes explaining or strategizing what those candidates were doing. One of the things that we see, and I talked about this in my political communication article that I did with Marion Just, about 90% of what candidates say is about the future. It's about what they want to do for the country. And about 90% of what we hear through mass media is what we call in the game frame of politics, talking about strategy, talking about the horse race, who's ahead, who's behind, who's attacking whom, who's trying to appeal to different voting blocks. And this happened during the 1990s, especially with the fragmentation of media, but it also happened once the three majors no longer were receiving financial support from the institution. They had to generate their own profit. And so we saw stories start to get shorter and put more into this game frame that they thought Americans wanted to hear, or at least would hook them into watching the newscast if they talked more about strategy and politics as a game. When you start talking about politics as a game, then we're thinking about winners and losers. But of course, politics isn't like that. Politics is an ongoing process of collaboration, of compromise, of maybe losing this time and coming back again. It's not like a sporting event. And so because of that, because of the way that politics, the coverage of politics had changed, that's why you see candidates, trying to seek out their own way to talk more about what they want to talk about and what their plans and policy goals are.
I remember Trump specifically said that. They go, "Why do you keep tweeting? Why do you keep going on Twitter?" So I could just say what I want directly to the public. I don't have gatekeepers. And people forget he didn't jump on Twitter day one. Mm-hmm. He gradually came to that. And all we think of now is Trump and Twitter. But if you watch that initial couple of weeks when he started being president, he was trying to do press releases and he was getting cut off. And then he found Twitter. Boom. I speak right to the public. Don't have to ask anybody. It's exactly what I said. No words. So
well, it's also more than that. It's more than that. He realized that he called Twitter his rocket. He presses the button and watches it go up. He was able to use Twitter to generate more than, I think they estimated, $2 billion worth of free advertising, or as we call it in the world of consulting, earned media,
right.
which is the repetition of your message through the news.
Right.
And Donald Trump has said this. He knows the more outrageous he says something, the more it's going to be repeated. And I wouldn't exactly call him a puppet master with the strings, but at least he knows, he's got the treats. If you've got a dog, that's how responsive they are to the treats and how you can generate their attention just by saying that word, among others that they like. And he knows that's how the system works. And he was able to use it to his advantage.
That's why he kept using the word China. I watched one of his speeches when it was popular, and he just goes, China, 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 like 15 times at the beginning of the speech. It looked insane, but that's what his people wanted to hear, right?
Also, the wall. The wall was another big one. He knew that was an applause line, and he knew it would drive people crazy in the press. And because, he kept saying, and I'm going to make Mexico pay for it. And everybody's, how? That's ridiculous. There's no way you can make that happen. And but that didn't matter. What mattered was the coverage. Yeah.
Fair enough. And, maybe that's why Joseph Biden has also picked up building the wall and also picked up keeping Latin kids in cages, but you don't hear so much about it because he doesn't promote it like Trump. Let me ask you about this. Drudge report, according to some historians, made the Monica Lewinsky scandal happen in Bill Clinton's era. It wasn't mainstream news. It was the Drudge report, an internet site. When I look at that, I begin to think, even if you got rid of social media, you can go back to 96, 98, and here's this internet site, and it exploded the story and made it a national news story. And then the other top three networks and CNN had to cover it after that. So we already had the internet in Bill Clinton's era, being independent of the media and causing a national uproar. How do we fix the social media polarization issue now, short of getting rid of the entire internet, which we can't do?
No, we can't do that. And there are researchers working on this. And predominantly, it's a slow and difficult process of getting people in a room and getting them to talk to one another, at least at the mass level. At the elite level, there are, most members of Congress, and many of them have left because they're like, I can't deal with this politics of personal destruction. But many of them know it's a game. Many of them know it's a charade that they're playing and are able to work together. But there are some that don't, and there are some that have really made their bones this way, like a Marjorie Taylor Greene. But when it comes to trying to get people together, we know that if you take members of Congress and you put them on what's called a CODEL, which is a congressional delegation, which is a trip internationally for fact finding, those members come back and are more likely to co-sponsor legislation together. They're more likely to work together once they get to know people. We've talked at the Graduate School of Political Management. We bring in a lot of former members of Congress. We have them as fellows, and they talk to our students and they tell them, look, I used to live in DC. I wasn't flying back to my district every Thursday and coming back every Monday. I had friends who I lived with. We shared an apartment, or we shared a house, or we were right next door to each other. We watched each other's kids. We had dinners together. And when you have that personal contact, you're less likely to dehumanize them. You're less likely to attack them. And so it's only through interpersonal contact which of course social media is terrible for, that you are able to restore some of this bipartisanship, some of the working together. And some other researchers who've done it at the mass level have talked about how they bring people into focus groups, and over a series of meetings with people, getting people to talk about what they value, what their fears are, what their hopes are. You can lower some of that tension between partisans. So again, it's the solution is much more difficult than the problem that created it. Or I won't say that social media created it. Again, I won't fall into that trap, but exacerbated it certainly. It's going to be a long, hard road of people talking to one another and what their values are. And that's really difficult. It's difficult to get people to do that, especially when we see the geographic sorting of people that we're seeing as well.
Thank you. Yeah, the big sort. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong here, is you're someone who lives now in 2023 and you're going social media is the problem. I'm watching you as an expert on social media and you're going, well, actually the ground was saturated for social media to be the problem. Mm-hmm. And if we're really going to fix the problem, it's not, you can't just get rid of the internet. You can't get rid of social media. The cat's out of the bag, the genie's out of the bottle. We really got to fix the problems that were started in 1992 by Newt mm-hmm. Gingrich, where he started telling everybody, don't hang out with the other side.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So the fix to social media isn't even social media. It isn't even anything we've seen in the last 5 to 7 years. We got to go back 25, 30 years into the past mm-hmm. and start there with the cultural issue in Congress in order mm-hmm. to fix the problem we see with social media today.
Yeah. Well, I think, trying to go back and fix something, I think that's an interesting mental exercise. But I think the more important question is, how do we get out of where we are now?
Yeah.
Right? And how do we move forward? We can't, we can identify that these are some of the problems of personal destruction. But until people stop rewarding politicians who engage in this, and until, we have, algorithms in social media that stop privileging messages that are, particularly toxic from an interpersonal level, we're going to continue this. So it's not all social media. It's a system that rewards people who engage in this type of behavior. And social media is a channel and a vehicle for it. It is not everything.
Okay, here's the next question. Do you see Congress ever regulating or changing the algorithms in social media? Congress gets together and says, we pass a law saying you social media companies can't do algorithms that make people mad intentionally. Like if people argue on their own, that's fine. But you're feeding this in and feeding it in. You got to stop that. Is that a possibility?
I don't see them doing that because that's proprietary. And but I do see them perhaps trying to make, and we've seen this in the past, there's arguments about making social media more responsible for the content, right, that they're putting out there. Now, that instead of actually trying to tinker or regulate with the algorithm itself, leaving that onus on the owner operator to do that.
So just saying, hey, we, Congress, trust you, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everybody to, better manage your site and cut down on this polarization.
Correct. Section 230, right, is what, we're talking about.
Sure. But we also know that it's in these companies' financial interest to keep doing what they're doing. Obviously, that's why they're doing it. They didn't go, oh, I want to ruin America. It was, I want to make as much money as I possibly mm-hmm. can. And the more, the more time your eyeballs are looking at that screen, that's dollars. And they found out if you make people upset, you spend a lot of time looking. So we'd have to get Congress to go, hey, corporations, I want you to stop doing the thing that made you your incredible profits the last 5 to 7 years.
Yeah. Yeah. But if we look at some of the social media, some of this traditional social media, Facebook and Twitter, they're not doing well economically. The one that's on the rise is, of course, TikTok. And I think, if we're going to think about the future and how we need to change what is out there in order to help us at least ameliorate some of these problems that we have with polarization, I think TikTok's even going to be even more difficult to deal with because these are, 10-second, 20-second vignettes, and it is incredibly addictive. incredibly addictive to people, and they know how to keep people addicted through their algorithms of what they have coming up next in the video feeds. And politicians are going to be going where the eyeballs are. And so we're going to see politicians going to TikTok. Many of them already have, and trying to find a way to maximize their approach as well.
I just don't see it working where Congress is able to go, look, we're not going to check. We're not going to tell you how to do it, but we're going to trust you to do the right thing and cut down all this tension. Although it's the major way you make profit, we want you to start cutting into your profit stream. And we're not going to look at how you did it because that's proprietary, but we're going to trust you to do it.
Well, again, I'm not advocating for this solution, but I'm saying this is what many people are talking about as a potential policy solution. Yeah. And again, I think from a potential profitability standpoint, that might make things more difficult because the level of monitoring and the amount of labor that it would take to be involved in that, unless you can figure out AI to figure out how to do this, it's going to make these can we already call them legacy social media, like social media, Twitter? Like I said, they're already having a hard time, and this is going to make them less profitable in the long run. But they're looking to branch out and try new things. It's a wide world out there.
I also wonder how good Congress could be at this. I remember Mark Zuckerberg famously going to Congress, and he had to explain to a group of senators what Facebook was and how it works. Mm-hmm. That there's advertising.
Yes, they didn't understand that it was like advertising.
They're like, what if I don't want chocolate? It doesn't matter. I literally saw him having to explain stuff a 12-year-old knows up to like a 20-year-old. Like basically everybody gets this. And then half the Senate was looking at him like, what, huh? Mm-hmm. And these are the people that we're going to expect to do the regulation. They barely understand the concept of advertising on a Facebook page. Mm-hmm. And they showed that blatantly 2 years ago. This is the group that's going to reel in the unregulated market?
Yeah, but even more than that, if Congress tries to create restrictions or authorizes the FCC to do so, people will always be one step ahead. That's always the case. People will find a way. And so the larger question is, how do we as a polity try to deal with this politics of personal destruction that has come through political polarization, rather than trying to control these tools, trying to think about who we are and how we interact and how we can change that to make things better.
So the solution to social media really isn't about social media; it's about us, the people.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
I know it's a little bit outside your area. How do we get people to start talking to each other? If you don't have answers, that's fine. I just wondered if you had some off the top of your head.
Again, I don't. There are incentives that people provide, for people joining groups and talking. That is possible. Of course, it helps, right, to have the people at the top, the elites talking to one another through the congressional delegations, retreats, and other things that can be done in a bipartisan fashion. That hopefully can trickle down to the mass polarization and help ameliorate that. But again, this isn't really my field. There are people out there doing work in here, and also we're talking, we're shifting people at the margins, and we've got to find a way to make it more broad based.
So we need to start seeing Congress members get together and say, we need to put our differences aside and work together. And I see each other, like maybe AOC and Donald Trump, or AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene reach out and hug each other and say, we have radically different ideas, but what's important for the country is that we figure out a way to work together for solutions.
Right. We saw former presidents get together to help with Katrina and to help with Houston when they had the hurricanes there, standing together, doing videos together. This can be one way of at least providing elite signals to the mass public about what's really important and what politics is really about.
So when liberals say, let's make a list of everybody who ever voted or worked for Donald Trump so that we could punish them for the rest of their life, that's not a good way to reduce polarization?
Of course not. No, that breeds resentment.
Oh, okay. When a president goes on TV and says 78 million voters of the other party are, quote, enemies of the state, is that how you help reduce polarization?
Of course not. That
Oh,
breeds resentment
okay.
as well. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I just because when I talk to a lot of liberal professors that come on, and I love it, and I'm a liberal, but they're always bringing up what the right did, and I go, well, what about these examples? I mean, isn't that not good? Or like Kamala Harris, she's the vice president. She joked on the Ellen DeGeneres show about shooting Trump in the head. No, I'm not joking. Yes, you can look it up. No, nobody knows about that. No, they don't talk about it. It's on the Ellen DeGeneres show. She outright made a joke about it. It's felony. She's vice president. No one brings that up. So I'm just wondering, there seems to be a little bit of give and take on both sides. What hope do you have for the future? That we're going to do this cultural change and move things back to 1991? I'm sorry. That's the answer. Never mind. That's fine. I'll go to a different question.
The media landscape is not very optimistic right now.
I'll go to a different.
Again, I will leave it to my colleagues who are studying this to give us a more specific set of instructions.
I want to say thank you for that. Was great. Okay, I'll ask you the last two questions I ask everybody. Here we go. You're not you. You're not me. You're a third person watching this interview, and they've learned a lot. They've heard some stuff that they don't hear on TV from any source. And they go, wow, that's really informative. And there was a lot of material and a lot of new things, and they're struggling to remember it all, but it's a week later, 5 days from now. And they're going, I learned so much. I struggle to remember it all, but there was this one thing that the professor said, and boy, I can't remember the rest of that show, but he said this one thing, and I can't get it out of my head 5 days later. What is that one thought you want a random person you'll never meet to not be able to stop thinking about 5 days from now after they finish watching the show?
Well, I didn't actually get a chance to say it, if I can say it now.
Yeah.
And this is the main point from the article that you brought up here on in the polarization book. What happened with Democrats in 2020 is that very liberal segment of them, they didn't break off. About 10% of Sanders voters voted for a third-party candidate, or even voted for Trump in 2016. In 2020, that wing of the party came back to vote for Biden, and it was because they thought they learned from their loss that you have to play politics in a certain way, and there are consequences to your actions as a voter. And I do believe ultimately in the ability of people to learn about the consequences of their actions and the negative effects that can come about them, both at the elite level and at the mass level. And that is something that I do have some optimism about.
People can learn. People can change. People can reflect. There's a lot of evidence of that. Okay. That was a great ding. Last question. I hope you found this was a fair interview. We didn't put words in your mouth. We didn't try to control what you said. You got to say your piece. Do you know anybody, and you don't have to name anybody, but we always ask, do you know anybody who might be willing to be part of an honest conversation? They could be an activist. They could be an academic. Anybody who might be willing to be part of this conversation. We always ask. You don't have to name anybody, but we always ask.
If you gave me some time, I could probably send you a few names.
Okay. I'm going to email you a copy of this video.
Okay.
I'll do it in a little bit. Is there anything you wanted to say or propose, or questions you had for us, or key material you wanted to get out that you felt you weren't able to, Professor?
Well, finally, that one group of what my colleague and I call the expressive attentives, the people who are online expressing themselves about politics and are more polarized than the rest, that's between about 24 and 32%, depending on how you measure it, of the party. It is not everyone. So just because they are the loudest voice in the room doesn't mean they're the only voice in the room.
And they're about 1/4 to no more than about 1/3 of the party.
Yeah.
So you have literally 3/4 to 2/3. 3/4 to 2/3 of the party is not these people, but you never know it, right?
Yeah.
From the amount of yelling and screaming and jumping and hollering they do, as my grandma used to say.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay. Grandma, thanks for that reference. You're doing well up there. My grandma was okay. She's why is all that hollering and wrestling? You wouldn't say wrestling. She was from Oklahoma. You'd say wrestling. So we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Professor. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
And I will email you shortly with a copy of the video, and we'll go from there.
Great talking with you today.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.